The optimist in me says things will get better, but there's been no evidence in the recent cycles to back that up. Without evidence, all we have is hope. We just haven't been able to move the needle. And he added that Bieniemy has yet to matriculate to the next level, that's a real head scratcher to him. Obviously, we know how successful Bieniemy has been. Stephen A., do you think star players, so we've heard from coaches, do you think star players need to be more vocal about the lack of black head coaches in the NFL?
Hell yes. It should have been the case. And I'm not going to call out names or whatever because I don't know, the folks who may have done so or those who are doing it behind the scenes, more power to them. But when you talk about giving a voice to the voiceless, which is something that has been popularized throughout American history when it comes to discrimination or racist practices, the fact of the matter is that being silent or just operating behind the scenes, although that can be productive, you have to speak out at some point. At least somebody does. And the reality is that when it comes to black coaches in the NFL as well as in the National Basketball Association, they're few and far between. Avery Bradley and Kyrie Irving are guys that I'd like to give credit to in the offseason before bubble play because they were trying to bring attention to the paucity of black coaches in the National Basketball Association because the numbers were dwindling before our very eyes, and we didn't hear anything. That's always been the case in the National Football League. As of right now, the year is 2021. There are 3 black head coaches. 3. That's it. Mike Tomlin, Brian Flores in Miami, and, of course, David Culley, who's the new head coach for the Houston Texans, who's been in the league for 27 years before he got a head coaching job. Robert Saleh for the Jets, he came over as a defensive coordinator from the San Francisco 49ers to get the head coaching job, born in Michigan, raised of Lebanese descent, Lebanese parents, what have you. Not African-American, but nevertheless it's a minority hire. Of course, the previous year, Ron Rivera, well-respected and recognized, got hired in the nation's capital by the Washington football team, but he was the only minority hire the year before that. The league is 70% black. It's a multi-billion-dollar establishment. They're talking about how this league could generate in excess of $25 billion a year, at least before the pandemic, that's what they were talking. And yet, considering how popular this league is, nothing has happened. And no player says anything about it. The millions upon millions of dollars that they're making, the way they're set and their generations are set, somehow, some way, nobody has the courage to open their damn mouths and speak out about it. And if you remember, Max, I brought this up when it came to even Colin Kaepernick. When Colin Kaepernick took a knee, okay, everybody was in an uproar coming to his defense because he had been marginalized, because he had been essentially blackballed. Well, guess what? I got a slew of black coaches that could say this has been happening to them for decades, but no player said anything. And my last point, Max, Mike Tomlin has been in the National Football League for 14 years as a head coach. His record is 145, 78, and 1. He's won 65% of his games. Max Kellerman, are you aware of any of his assistants who've been hired?
Good point.
But Sean Payton got a tree, and Andy Reid got a tree, and Sean, and the list goes on and on. Sean McVay. They got trees. They got proteges. They got folks sprinkled throughout the league getting jobs. Zach Taylor, no disrespect, wish him nothing but the best in Cincinnati. He got a job there, okay? Where he come from? All I'm just saying is you just look at it, and it's like the unfairness is so flagrant, it's disgusting. And black players should be speaking up. Yes, long time ago.
Well, I agree. I think players, black and white, should be taking the lead here, as LeBron James and Chris Paul and others have done in the NBA. Let's keep in mind what we're dealing with in the NFL, though, Stephen A. Colin Kaepernick, and I mentioned this years ago while it was going on. Remember we did the show in L.A. with Snoop and Magic? Colin Kaepernick was kneeling broadly. Narrowly it's injustice in terms of law enforcement interactions with communities of color. But broadly, it's about systemic racism, right? And he hasn't had a job since then. He's been drummed out of the league unjustly. Doesn't have anything to do with his play. Right? So that's what the NFL does if you make too much noise about that issue. Now, you might argue, well, the way Kaepernick went about it, He touched the third rail, at least in terms of the NFL and their business, and there are ways of doing it without burning everything down. We could argue about that, but okay, let's say I concede that point. Yes, players should take the lead, but the power structure is completely imbalanced. I mean, the reason, I think primarily that we see this, is there's virtually no minority ownership in the NFL. And is that because the NFL is systematically kind of excluding or rejecting the attempts of minorities to own teams? Or is that because of our country's original sin? You know, you really want it. There's enormous economic inequity in this country based on the fact that black people were once slaves. And not only have there never been reparations made, but in which they are due, you know, which African Americans are due, in my view, and would be better for us societally. But in addition to that, post-slavery, they were also systemically, excluded from the economy in many ways. And so at least the parts of the economy you want to be involved in. And so that's really what we're talking about. The NFL is a reflection of the country in generally. But more specifically, even when you factor that in, 3 African-American head coaches in a league that's 70% African-American? Yes, I think that the league should make this one of its priorities, Stephen A., you know, along with making money. Obviously, that's always going to be their priority, and player health, because that could be something that could affect their business long term. I think this issue can also affect their business because it's beyond the pale at this point. Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.